too great and too marvelous for me. The first step in harvesting hope is the annihilation of arrogance. We've got to squash it out of us. Like weeds ruining a garden, we have got to uproot arrogance, or else it will continue to grow back and plague us and plague the hope that we should have. It will stifle the crop that we desire to grow, namely hope. David says, "My heart is not proud." Who was David? David was the king of Israel. Here's the king of Israel, the king of the nation, saying, "My heart is not proud." Keep in mind, David is king in Israel during the time of Israel's greatest expansion, their golden age. David was a man who conquered more territory than any other king of Israel had. He was a man who brought peace to his nation through his mighty warring arm. He was not only a powerful king, in the midst of, remember we talked about these empires that surrounded him, he defended and created for himself a powerful kingdom that stood against Egypt, Babylon, Assyria. So this tiny little nation stood against these great empires, and David was the king of this nation at that time. Not only was he a king during the greatest expansion of the history of Israel, during the Golden Age, but he was a man who conquered and defeated all of his enemies. He was a talented musician and poet, a military strategist, and not only all this, but he was handsome to boot. And he, this handsome, brilliant, artistic, powerful, savvy king, says, "My heart is not arrogant, my eyes are not proud." He stifled an arrogant heart. He recognized always that his authority, his prestige, his power, his position, his talents, his possession, everything that he had came from God, and God could take them away in a moment if he so chose. We cannot have a proud heart, for if we do, it will definitely get in the way of the hope that we have in our loving Heavenly Father. A focus on self doesn't leave enough room to focus on God. David says, "My eyes are not haughty." He doesn't look down on others. He recognizes that God has created all of us, and He loves all of us. He has created us all with a purpose. His eyes are not looking down on others. His eyes are not haughty. Eyes that are looking down on others fail to look up to glorify God above. Eyes that look down on others fail to look up to glorify God above. Eyes that are looking down can't focus on the harvest of hope that God has for us. We must have eyes that are not haughty to harvest this hope. The king of the most powerful country in all the region at the time says, "I do not concern myself with things too great and marvelous for me." Well, he's in charge of the nation. Shouldn't he be thinking about these things? Shouldn't he be thinking about the defense of the people and the health care that they need to keep themselves well, and the food and the economy? Shouldn't he be thinking about these, providing for their needs? Shouldn't he be a spiritual leader for his people? How can anything be too great for such a king to think about? If he's king, shouldn't he be thinking about these important things? You see, David acknowledges that no matter how hard he thinks, no matter how hard he plans, no matter how hard he conspires or philosophizes, that nothing he does or says can stop God's plan for his people. David did work hard. David did think about these things, but he didn't worry about them. He didn't focus his mind on them. He wasn't distracted by them. David knew that God was the place that he had to focus. David knew that God was in control. When things looked out of control, when his sons were rebelling and killing each other and trying to kill him, when the former king was chasing him and he was running through the wilderness trying to kill David, When David had been given multiple opportunities to eliminate this king and didn't take them. When David attempted to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and it resulted in the death of one of his people. When David was denied the privilege of building God's temple, David humbly submitted to God's will and recognized that in everything, God was in control, and that even the king doesn't understand fully God's plan. David wasn't going to waste his time worrying about what God was doing. Rather, he would trust in God. Trust him like a child trusts in their parents. This childlike trust in God meant that David's soul could rest without worry or fear of the unknown or the future. Verse 2 in 131 says, "But I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a weaned child that is with me or within me." You hear the repetition again? Because David isn't focused on his big bad self. Because he has learned to trust God and plan God's plan and to yield himself to it, he can be like a weaned child sitting on his mother's lap. Why a weaned child? This was something that I couldn't understand until I went online and I looked up the process of weaning. What David is saying here, think about this. When a child is being weaned from nursing or from the bottle or from the pacifier, they go through a period of discomfort, of anxiety, of anger sometimes. They want that thing, whatever it is that's being taken away from them. Things are changing, and they're afraid. They're not comforted. They are discomforted. So, a child, an adult, don't we, when we face changes, doesn't that cause us stress oftentimes? Adults struggle a lot of times to handle changes. But we oftentimes understand why something is happening. A child who doesn't have their pacifier anymore and can't really understand why they're not allowed to have that anymore is upset. They don't understand why. They just know it hurts. The change hurts. It doesn't feel good. The child who is no longer allowed to nurse doesn't know why they can't go to the breast anymore for the comfort that they have experienced for all of their life. She is forced to start eating this stuff called solid food. Yuck. It's going to take a while for her to get used to it. A child that no longer has her pacifier cries, "I want that back, Mommy, Daddy." It hurts. But a weaned child, one who has passed through this period of difficulty, this phase of adjustment, has found contentment on the other side. This is what David's talking about. It was a struggle to come to where he was. It was a struggle for this king, this handsome, smart, artistic, powerful king, to get beyond his pride and to wean himself from that pride. Perhaps being this brilliant military general went to his head. Or maybe it was all those hordes of girls screaming whenever he came into town. After he got back from killing Goliath, they screamed for him like Elvis, right? Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s. Hordes of girls. What man wouldn't that go to his head? He's a rock superstar. But David has learned, and it has been a challenging road. He has learned how important it is to get beyond his own pride and to submit humbly to the will of God. It was a painful lesson. It cost him the life of some of his children. That sent him wandering through the wilderness alone. David has learned the hard way that the only peace one can find in life is through trusting in God and God's plan for one's life, especially in the midst of the stormy gales of life. David was weaned from his arrogance